Hi everybody, welcome to the latest of our GAA Coach webinar series. We have Gerard O'Connor, who's Games Manager in Dublin, and Gerard is going to talk to us about transition from defence to attack. The presentation itself is due to last for about 45 minutes or so, so we might have a little bit of a chance for questions and answers at the end. You'll see on the right hand side of your screen that there's a little speech bubble with a question mark in it. That's a space for you to put in a question or a comment that you or Ger, and I can relay it to him before or later on during the session. So if anyone has any questions or comments like that, please do so through that Q&A part of the webinar. So Ger, if you're ready, you can work away with the presentation, and I'll leave it up to you.
Okay, thanks a million, Peter. Hello everyone, and hope you're all staying safe and enjoying your time to reflect as a coach. So as Peter said, tonight I've been asked to talk about this whole idea from transition from defense to attack. So simply for me, what transition means is a change in mind, a change in action, and a change possibly in the field. So tonight I'm going to try and talk you through what transition looks like from defense to attack. So if we think about it, a team's transition is the reorganization that is necessary, maybe as a result of winning possession or losing or conceding possession. So a team's attacking transition after winning possession is the reorganization from defense into its attacking play. And then likewise, so a defensive transition after conceding possession, in which it reorganizes from an attacking play to a defensive play. So here are the outcomes for tonight's webinar. So first of all, we're just going to use the analysis to help us see the facts. And I suppose the analysis helps in terms of what we do on the training field, and also can give feedback to players. Identifying the principles of attack and defense. I suppose as players, we need to understand our role. So whether we're an attacker, that doesn't mean that we don't ever defend, or if we're a defender, that doesn't mean we don't ever attack. So we need to understand what the principles of attack and defense are. Then we're going to look at implementing the components of tactical transition. So I suppose that's what we need to do when we switch from one phase of play to another phase of play. And then I'm going to demonstrate what good transition looks like in a game. So here I'm going to use some video, and I'm going to get you to think and discover some of the things that happen during the transitions between defense and attack. And finally, I suppose, and the most important bit is that we can talk all the theory and all the principles, but I suppose the most important thing is how do we transfer this to the coaching or to your coaching practice. So they're the main outcomes for tonight's webinar. So if we go back to just the word transition. So simply, it means to change. It also is a movement. It can be a development of a play. It can be the evolution from one stage to another. And it can also, I think, can be a mindset. And for me, the mindset is the action to move. And also it can be an area in the field. So when we go from a defensive area to an attacking area is the area within the field. So here is a pitch that's set up. So typically sometimes I would do this in training. And the whole idea is to give pictures or to give players a mental or a picture of what the field looks like in terms of attack and defense. So if we think about the red area is the attacking area. So here is where most of scores come from, the red zone. So for attackers, this is where we should be shooting from. It also paints a picture in the forward's mind that really, if they're shooting outside that area, it's probably not a good idea. Likewise, from the defensive end, what we want to do is we want to get players to tune into the notion that this area is danger. So if the opposition are coming in here, we need to get tackles in, we need to delay them, we need to dispossess them, and then we need to be able to move the ball out of that area as quickly as we can. So those two areas are key, and the piece in the middle is really the transitional area from where we move from defense to attack. So transition can happen anywhere, even though I've suggested the whole notion about a transitional area, but it can happen at any area of the field. So the team that some teams trot back into the defensive area and they just forget about the forwards coming down the field, and they get lots of bodies in around that area and hope that they're going to be able to stop the forwards from scoring. So the whole idea here is just to cover off that area, and then also from a transitional point of view, what we want to look at is the rapid movement from one area of the field to another. So if we think also in terms of defense, we're closing the door. We don't want anybody to come in. And in attack, we think about opening the door. So if you think about those two things and paint the picture in a player's head, closing the door means closing the space and not letting anybody to come in. Opening the door means wide, and players love these phrases because they trigger images in their head. So what I want you to do is, maybe as a way of maybe just getting into the session and for me to have some bit of interaction, because this is all new for us here in terms of developing coaches and communicating with coaches. So as in Gaelic football, it's difficult, sometimes impossible for coaches to notice and remember all the key facts that occur during the game. So you're equipped only maybe with the knowledge of your sport or the powers of observation. So trying to have a look at these pictures, what I want you to do is I want you to see there's more than one interpretation of the picture. So what I want you to look at is a number of images, and I want you to think what you see. Okay, so we'll start off first of all, we'll just maybe take 5 or 6 seconds for each one. So the first one I'd ask, is it a duck or a rabbit? Okay. How many legs had the elephant? So is it the Eskimo face or is it the Eskimo fur? Here, do you see a young woman or an old woman? And here, candlesticks or silhouettes. So seeing is not always believing. Sometimes your eyes can play tricks on you. So I think research tells us that on average, coaches can only recall about 30% of what happens during performance. So the analysis or the performance analysis helps with the remaining 70%, providing facts of what happened, which makes it a vital component of team and player improvement. So that leads us into the notion of perception. So as coaches, sometimes we perceive that players have made errors because we can't remember. So your perception of the game is not necessarily the same what is actually occurring. Opinion is your opinion and perception is your perception. Do not confuse them with the facts. So that brings us to the next part of our webinar, which is looking at, I suppose, why do we use analysis, or what the facts are actually telling us. So the facts of the game help us to focus on the key performance aspects that we want to improve in our coaching. So it gives clarity to things that we need to focus and have deliberate practice on. So for this next little piece, what I want to do is I want to give, before I give the facts, I want to give sort of a clear definition of what a turnover is, because there's sort of a little bit of confusion around it. And for me, this is how I define a turnover. So basically, you have possession, someone takes it off you. That's a dispossession. You have possession and you give the ball away because of pressure or poor execution. So there are two notions about turnovers. Also on the right hand side, you can see turnovers can happen as a result of a 50-50 pass being dispossessed, a poor execution of a hand pass or a kick pass, somebody being fouled, or maybe a ball being dropped short into the goalkeeper's hands. So the key thing here is that taking the ball off someone has a greater psychological benefit for your team. Furthermore, if you're dispossessed, generally you don't have time to cover. But in where you might maybe lose or kick the ball away, you might be able to recover. So that's why turnovers are a vital part of the game now. And so what I want you to do is have a look at some of these stats here, and I want you to maybe think how they might relate to restarts or kickouts. Have a guess yourself what they might mean, what you think they might mean. Okay, and this information I got kindly from Ray Byrne, who was the Dublin senior football analyst for a long number of years with the Dublin senior football team. So if you look at the first one, the team that restarts in less than 5 seconds has a scoring ratio, percentage increased to 80%. So that's vital. So our kickouts are the areas that opportunities to regain the ball, but there's also opportunities for turnovers as well. The other clock relates to teams that take longer than 5 seconds. So between 5 and 25 seconds, their scoring ratio goes down by 20% when they take longer. It stands to reason the opposition can get organized, people can mark up, the options can be cut down. So, for example, if a team is marking very tightly and there's a short kick out or a restart, then there's an opportunity for a turnover. And if you turn the ball high up the field in an advantageous position, then you have a great chance because you're closer to the scoring end to get a score. Here, again, are some facts. These facts, first of all, are around turnovers. So maybe have a think about what they might relate to. So, did you know that winning teams have a significantly higher number of turnovers than losing teams? Now that could mean that the team has dispossessed the opposition more, or it could mean that the opposition were wasteful with the ball. So turnovers is a key part of the game now that we should be focusing in on as coaches, because it highlights that key part of the game. The other thing, the 6 relates to teams, the good teams that get a turnover usually score within 6 seconds. So a good team will have the ball over the bar under 6 seconds. So I see a lot of matches and I look at a lot of games, and you see teams that have turned the ball over and they take slow transition to get the ball up the field. Their scoring percentage goes down the longer it takes them to get up the field. So these are just simple things for us to remember. So teams that move the ball slowly don't really understand the counter-attack. That counterattacks must try and catch the opposition out of position and off guard. And I suppose the whole idea of that is because teams are cute. If a turnover happens, they'll slow the opposition down. They'll create a foul, what might look like a technical foul, but what they're doing is they're getting themselves back so that they can organize the defense and that they can get into that formation so that they can minimize the time or the scoring chance. Also, I like to use trigger words when I'm coaching my teams, and the one thing for me is that the minute the ball goes over the bar, that's a transitional period, because the ball now is going to be coming back out the field and we have to be ready in order to attack that ball or to try and win it back. So being ready is a key thing. It's a mental thing, and for players, telling them to switch on, stay alive, are some triggers that help to do that. Also, turnovers can be a great indication of a want or desire for your team. It can also be a tactical setup, but the question I pose to you is, which comes first? Is the tactics or is it the want and desire? And sometimes the want and desire can be far outdo any tactical nuances. Here, I got some analysis from Owen McNichol and Ulster GAA, and here we were looking at the Ulster final from 2019, and these are the facts or the stats from that particular final between Donegal and Tyrone. Donegal had more turnovers than Tyrone. Donegal were patient, organised and disciplined in their defence, and they counter-attacked at pace, and they exposed Tyrone's gaps in defence. So here it emphasises and highlights the importance of turnovers in terms of the winning team. They had more than Tyrone, they won the match. Again, some analysis to focus in on, and this is from Bradley and O'Donoghue 2011, and this relates to when a team counterattacks or when a team has transitioned. So in most cases, the first or second pass is going forward. That's the first thing. The next thing is that we see that the importance of the first initiated pass. So the stats tell us that counterattacks or transition commence that have a greater return in terms of scoring commence with the hand pass first. So if you can see here, only 12% of counterattacks initiated with a kick pass resulted in a score, compared to 25% with a hand pass was used. So that is a key part in terms of moving the ball quickly, so that maybe the ball can't be slowed down, and also it's a higher return on our scoring rate. So that's a look at the analysis piece. So I'm just going to move on now to the principles of attack and defense. Okay. So, sorry, just one other stat. I just put this in today from Mangan 2019 and looked at the distances covered by Gaelic footballers over 60 minutes. So you can see here the half-backs, midfielders and the forwards are covering a massive amount of ground in the modern game. And that's because they have to be mobile in order to support both defence and attack. So that's an important part, important thing for us to remember as coaches. If we want good transition, we have to have really mobile players. We have to have players that can move up and down the field in order to get those transitions moving quickly. So onto our principles of attack and defence. So we're going to start with the principles of defence. So there are 7 principles of defence, and we look at delay first of all. So delay simply means just slowing down the attack. Options for the So we look at balance. I suppose it's being conscious of our spacing and maintaining good organisation in defence, so that we're not all being sucked into the ball, that we're covering off space, and that we have a good balance in terms of the numbers that are around us. The compactness then relates to getting bodies into that area of the field where there's scoring is going to happen, but getting bodies in there with a purpose. There's no point in bringing a whole load of people back and they're not applying pressure to the players that are coming there. A great thing that I came across from Terence McWilliams a good number of years ago around that whole idea about communication in defence, where you use the cover, nose and support in terms of communicating the roles of what you're doing at the time. Then we look at sort of the cover, and tandem defence is a good example of that, where you provide cover to cut off the threats. So it's almost like an insurance. So I step in and the man behind me is going to be there as a cover to step in when maybe somebody breaks my line. The support part then is about providing options. So one maybe applies the pressure and another person might be there to get the ball or steal the ball. So, or it could be an opportunity where a forward is coming in and the defender says, I'll go to him. So you're taking the man and stepping over. Restraint really is about being patient, but applying pressure without maybe fouling the ball, but maybe directing people to positions of the field that they don't want to go to, or so that players can't see, the forward players can't see options to get rid of the ball. I suppose the key thing then here is about the transition. How do we get the ball if we're defending, and what do we do with it straight away when we dispossess the opposition? So it's that delay, deny, dispossess, and that's the piece about the development, moving the ball forward. So we move on then to the principles of attack. And here, attacking the goals is the whole penetration, breaking the line before defenders can get organized. Movement, as I said earlier, is about the interchanging positions, so moving into different positions that you're trying to draw the defenders into areas that maybe they're uncomfortable being in. So that could be for dummy runs, but also for bringing players out of position as well. And then width is about creating space wide, exploiting the wide channels, which sometimes can give you real scoring threats in the center of channels also. Support, then just, I suppose, off the shoulder support, either left or right, or the possibility of a backdoor support, and also can be some delay runs too. Creativity is a key one for the principle of attack, because this is the unpredictability that maybe can unhinge a defense. So a dummy pass, a dummy kick, even a flick on or a knockdown to a forward can be the one thing that unlocks the defense, and that creativity is a joy to watch. And then accuracy. So accuracy in the execution of the what pass. So what being the weight, the height, the angle, and the timing of the pass, and obviously accuracy for shooting. And then the last piece, again, the transition. And this sometimes forwards or attackers find difficult to switch from the attack role quickly to adopt a defensive role. And that's where the transition happens in the attack. So maybe a simpler way for us to remember that might be, and my good friend Brendan Harper showed me this a long number of years ago. And if this is the only thing you remember from the webinar tonight, I'd be delighted, because it stuck with me in my head. So the principles of attack, or sorry, the principles of defense, you add scab. So think about that fella's knee. A scab is going to come onto that knee, and all the principles are there in add scab, if you can remember. And then for the principle of attack, we look at the mad wasp. And if you think of the mad wasp buzzes all over the place. Think of that forward is constantly moving, that he's never standing, that he's always floating around the place and being on his toes. So there are many factors that affect the speed of a team's transition, including mobility of players. The one thing that I found is that players that have good mobility have a quicker transition. Teams that have not so good players with mobility, their transitions are a lot slower. So the other thing to also remember is that teams that use a more direct style will obviously have a quicker transition, because maybe they let the ball into the forwards. They might have a big full forward, so their transition might be quicker because they're letting maybe a kick pass in. Or some teams then that maybe over rely on hand passing a lot will have maybe slower transition because they feel they just want to keep possession of the ball. So it's about balancing the two. So here I'm sort of moving into the phases of play in the game. So this is maybe might be a simpler way to understand this whole idea of transition. So there in a game there are various phases of play. There's an attacking phase, there's a defensive phase, and when we have the ball, we're attacking. When we don't have the ball, we're defending. But when we're attacking and we've lost the ball, then we're in a transition. And likewise, when we're defending and we've gained possession, we are also in transition. So here is maybe you can see the principles of play and how each team is trying to apply these depending on whether they're in possession or out of possession. So if you're in possession, you're looking at attacking, you're looking at creating space, you want to get scoring, and you want to exploit that counter-attack. Then on the opposite side, if you're out of possession, you're trying to slow everything down, you're trying to get into position, you're trying to halt the opposition. So you go back to your 4 or 5 Ds where you're trying to delay, deny, dispossess, and then obviously develop, which is getting back into up the field and transition to try and get a score. So we're moving on now to the next part, which is around the key principles of what good transition is. And I feel that looking at these, any team, any coach can really focus on these. So we look at the first thing is speed is essential. The slower you go, the easier it is for the opposition to get organized, to stop the attack, to slow things down. So speed has to be the essence. Speed of thought, but also speed of movement. So it's not just one or two players that are moving, but a whole unit within your team is moving to try and create as much diversion and as much pressure on the opposition. So that brings us into pressurizing the defensive team or the team that is defending. So if there's only one or two runners, it's probably easier for the defending team to try and track those. But if there's 6, 7, and 8 and 9 people running, then it can be difficult for the team defending to cover all angles. I suppose good decision making is vital here. So we look, we see, we decide, and we act. And when you think about the really, really good players, they always play with their head up. They see the opportunities, they see the pass, they see that killer pass that will take out 4 defenders and create that space inside. So decision making is really good, or is a key. And we'll talk a little bit about at the end about game sense and how we can try and maybe coach that, because that's a critical one for players in terms of transitioning the attack. Also, the notion about switching the point of the attack. If we're predictable, and a lot of teams, because maybe we're right-footed, predominantly right-footed, even my own team, when I look at when we're attacking, we tend to attack all down the right-hand side of the field. And good teams will look at that and be able to see that most of the attacks come down the right-hand side. So being able to switch your point of attack is very, very important because it keeps the opposition on their toes. The other thing then is communication, and is vital. And that is not just the verbal communication, but the non-verbal, the use of the hands, showing where you want the ball, a little nod of the head, that telepathy between your players that comes from practicing and rehearsing and doing a lot of these games in practice. There's some other principles that are not here up on the slide, but for me, being composed is one. I know that speed is essential, but you can be fast but composed. You can be confident and being speedy as well. Also in control and competent. Being able to execute the skills when you're under pressure is also an essential part of the principles of good transition. So the next piece I'm going to show you is a number of games that I want you to try and maybe have a look at. I'm going to pose some questions to you, and obviously I won't be able to hear what you're saying, but I'd like you just maybe to have a guess at what things are happening during the game, and we'll try and get a little bit of interaction that way. Okay, so and the next piece of what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you this first little clip, and the question that I have for you here is if you were the player in this position, considering the principles of attack that we've just looked at, what options would you take? Okay, so I'm going to pause it in the middle of the clip. I'm not going to let you see the full thing. Okay, here we go. Okay, so question I have for you: what option would you take? You're the Garchin footballer in the Tipperary colours, heading up the field, attacking just after turning the ball over. Okay, and we'll have a look. Okay, so the transition deep in their defence, breaking at speed down the middle, and they obviously have a good coach. The next one, again, if you were a player in the position, considering the principles of attack, what option would you take? Okay, so what option would you take? And we play it on. So sometimes letting the ball in directly is the quickest way to get the ball up the field. So the next one, what I want you to do in this one is I want you to count the number of passes from the transition to the score. Okay? Okay, so how many passes? And here you could see the ball was moved the full length of the field. The point of changing the point of the attack, where the forward went to the right hand side, drew two defenders, and then created space on the inside in front of the goals. This time, what I want you to do is, what type of a turnover was this? And what was the first pass initiated in this transition? Okay, here Tyrone under kick out, worked the ball up the field. We're in a prime scoring range, but a poor pass allowed Kerry to move the ball fast up the field. Hand pass was the first one, so the turnover was poor execution of a pass as opposed to dispossession. And Kerry made 4 passes to unlock the Tyrone defence and scored the winning goal. Okay, here, what I want you to do is I want you to look at the short restart and a high press. Okay. So here, the turnover is achieved by the speed of thought and by the positive attitude of the player to win the ball back. Okay. Here, I want you to have a look at the 3-pass move from transition to create a score as a result. So here you could see some of the principles of attack: early ball, 2 kicks, creativity by a flick on, and reaction off the post by the corner forward to get the score. Again, what I want you to do here is have a look at what option would you take if you were this player in that position. I'm going to pause it in the middle of the play. Okay, so turnover, poor pass, as opposed to dispossession. What option would you take if you were the player? You've probably seen this one before. A great goal by Con. Okay. The next one here, again, what option would you take if you were the player in blue? Okay. So what option would you take? I'm going to run around. Fantastic goal by St. Pat's. Okay, and the last one. So again, here what I want you to do is have a look at what option would you take. This time it's the player in white, just after winning the breaking ball from the midfielder. Okay, so here you can see support left and right and back door. What option would you take? And again, you could see that creativity of the dummy bounce in order to make the forward or the goalkeeper make a decision, and it was an easy goal in the finish. Okay, so that's what good transition looks like. So this is the sort of the final piece that we're coming into the webinar this evening, and for me, the most important thing is about how you integrate that into your coaching practice. A piece of research that I came across recently, and it was in Australia, and the research looked at both Aussie rules and rugby, and it was around this whole idea of making sense of game sense. So I suppose the notion of moving away from the traditional drill orientated training to games-based coaching has been researched. I suppose looking at the two sports, high intensity rugby and Aussie rules, very similar to Gaelic football, intermittent movements, configurations of play merging together, so very, very similar. But what the research is telling us about game sense is that game sense, the word game suggests something simple, but in actual fact, game sense is actually not just playing a game or running a game. So the games-based approach has actually found the shift in practice for coaches has been very difficult because there's more skills than just running a game. There's the skill of observing, there's the skill of being patient, and there's the skill of asking the right question at the right time. So we need to understand that running a game is not a games-based approach to coaching. Running a game and using, I think Niall Corpin talked about it last week or the week before, freeze, frame, and replay. Asking those questions: what option did you have there? Where would you go to next? Who was on your left? What option had you got on your right? So here's a game that a very good friend of mine, the late John Morrison, he would have mentored me over the years, and he and myself published a book called Give Us a Game and Creative Game Sense, and a lot of the games are in this book that we use. So this first game that we're going to look at is called the two ball game. It took a long number of sessions before the players that I've been coaching could really get a hang of this, because the level of concentration in this has brought it to a new level. So if you can imagine, the goalkeeper in football or hurling kicks out a ball and directly after kicks out a second ball. The purpose of the game is that whoever wins possession attacks. And in actual fact, the blue team could be attacking and the red team could be attacking. So you almost have two games within the one game. And somebody kept saying to me, but this never happens in a match. You never get two balls kicking out. But the principle of the game is not about that there'll be two balls in play. It's that you focus in on either attacking or defending. Do you go to the ball? Do you try and get the ball off somebody? Do you support the runner? Do you try and support another defender? So this was a massive learning point for me in terms of the game. Also, it also creates speed of thought and speed of movement. Here I also have another game that I'd like to share with you, and this is a little video that I'm going to show you of it in action. And here it requires the players to both switch on mentally, but also have physical action. And this can be sometimes difficult for young players to switch from one to the other. It can be even difficult for adult players as well, I can tell you that. But the physical thing is fine. It's the mental thing, switching from one role to the other, can present a difficulty and can present a challenge for players. But the more you do it, the more you practice it, the better they become. It's like anything, the more you do, the skills become automatic. The key thing here is that there's a certain amount of communication. A lot of what happens is when there's no communication, then the mental thing doesn't kick in. So you have to be able to get players to use trigger words in order to get them to switch on, stay alive, be alert to the ball, whatever it is to engage the players. So here's a little video on turnovers count. So one team is coming out with the ball, and they have to advance past the defending team. They have to get out past the 45-meter line, and then they can begin their own attack, turn, and head. So the yellow team are working out the field with the ball, and they're on. The blue team trying to dispossess. And the key thing here is that the blue team, if they dispossess, can shoot on sight, which really is the key in terms of when you turn the ball over, you can get real reward from working hard and dispossessing the opposition. The team working the ball out, they're slow and they both create space. So they can over here, this turnover, a long hand pass. There we have a score. Okay, so actually shouldn't this. The key thing here is that you have to have good execution of skills as well, but also play with your head up. And obviously, if you're going to go into the tackle, you're going to have higher risk of getting that or dropping the ball, the turnover for the opposition. You can see when the defending team gets the ball, how they come alive because they want to score. That's a mental thing. But there's a reward for getting the ball. It means they're going to get a score. And the shot's on, they're in the scoring zone. Okay, and we're moving on to the next one. So here's another little video clip. This is a game again from my late good friend John Morrison, and John created some fantastic games. Very insightful coach. Looked at the game creatively. Looked at how you could really get players to tune in the mental side of things. So this game is called 5-2. So one team has got 5 passes in order to get the ball up the field, and if the defending team turn the ball over or the other team loses possession, then the team that transitions the ball have only got 2. So this is a brilliant game for that whole notion about moving the ball quickly when you transition from defense to attack. It also is a great way to promote dispossession, speed of movement and thought as well. So the team with the kick out will have 5 possessions. We need the players to count out the passes so that we need to be going forward. Okay. Sometimes we take unnecessary defense, we end up going nowhere. That slows down the attack. As I said earlier, good teams have a score within 6 seconds per turnover. And sometimes we have to take the risk of breaking past the defender in order to create some space. We can't just be going laterally all the time. Yeah, you can see here the play is a little bit slow. We get the shot away. Again, counter attack is too slow. Defenders can get across, but here, great crossfield ball using the kick, created some space for a score. Okay, and then another resource that coaches can use, Give Us a Game, second edition, and here, who's attacking, who's defending. In all these games, we must use this whole notion of freeze frame and replay. So, you know, when a player has done something and we just pause, say, okay, stop. What options did you have here? Because decision making for a player must come from them. We cannot coach decision making by telling somebody that they should have kicked the ball here or there. We can only do it through making them aware, making them self-reflect, and by critiquing their own performance during the game. So using questions is a key skill in game sense and coaching game sense. Here, this game is around who's attacking, who's defending. Again, it's a quick turnaround between attacking and defending. So it allows players to work at high intensity for 2 or 3 minutes, and your concentration levels need to be really, really high. Okay. And finally, this game allows you to work on the transition, the ball from one end of the field to the other, where you've got limited time in each area of the field. So you might allow 9, 8, 7 seconds in the defensive area, 4 seconds in the midfield or the transitional area, and 3 seconds in the forward area. Again, is to create urgency about transitioning the ball fast up the field. If we know that teams that transition or that have a turnover can score within 6 seconds, then we need to try and catch the opposition when they're not organised and there's a bit of chaos working or happening at that particular time. So here's a sort of another example of that to show you on the field. So again, you don't want to be overdoing the number of the time in possession in these areas of field. You want to rapidly get the ball up as quickly as you can in order to create your best scoring opportunities and to heighten your scoring chances as well. Okay, so I think that's me done. I hope that we're able to explain the analysis piece and how some of the information around the analysis can help us with our coaching. I hope that you'll remember maybe the principles of attack and defense, the ad scab and the mad wasp. If we look at the principles of good transition, I said speed is the essence. The point of the attack, changing the point of the attack. Also communication, the non-verbal communication, and also speed of thought and movement. And then finally, what good transition looks like. It looks quick, it looks effortless, there's creativity in it, which constantly on the move, it looks positive. And finally then taking the games that can be used in order to develop it to your practice field. So Peter, there's just some references from the presentation, and I'd like to just maybe thank a few people that helped me along the way to get this together today. So Brendan Harper, who has been a mentor for mine for years, Sean O'Toole and Damien Quigley, and for Roger Keenan, who I bounced a few ideas off and came back to me with some footage from some of his teams as well. That's it, Peter.
Thanks, Gerard. We have a few minutes, and there's been a few questions come in. If you want to try and address a couple of them.
Okay, sure.
So, just a question about, I suppose, football and hurling. Would you think this turnover stats are similar in both codes?
No, I would doubt it. I would doubt it very much. Obviously, football is a much more possession game, whereas in hurling, there's a lot more. There's probably less phases of the ball being held for greater lengths of the time. So, okay, the game in hurling has changed a good bit. There's still there's probably more possession now in the game than there used to be, but the stats would certainly be a lot different for hurling. Yeah.
I think the principles that you spoke about were good though, and would apply.
Oh, the principles. Sorry, yeah, the principles would apply. Absolutely, the principles of attack and defense would apply in any sport, really. Yeah.
Just a question here from James Lovett. Do you think the art of individual defending is a skill that's not there or needed anymore with so many players behind the ball?
Yeah, well, I suppose that's a really good question, James. I suppose defenders can sometimes hide when there's lots of bodies back and maybe not take responsibility for doing the simple jobs. If you think about a defender, the first job is to man mark, and some players think they're marking and they're 2 yards away. So yes, I think in a way some players maybe have got off the hook because getting numbers back maybe lets them off the hook in terms of doing the basics first, which are marking, being tight, dispossessing, denying the space, all of those things that good defenders do. So there is certainly a need for individual defense, and it should be practiced as much as possible. Yeah.
Does transition always need to be at pace? So, for example, if you have a comfortable lead, might you elect to hold on to the ball to draw the opposition out?
Yeah, I suppose so. You see teams that will be slow in their attack and they'll be methodical. I think I use a lot of club clips there because most of us are dealing with clubs. So I suppose we tend to see a lot more slow, deliberate play with the inter-county teams because obviously they have huge competencies in terms of the skills. But yeah, some teams will hold the ball and try and move it over and back to create space, width, and some opportunities. But ultimately, if you're going to try and break a line, you have to go quick. In terms of you have to either run at pace to create some space or some sort of confusion or diversion. But as you can see from the stats tell us that the teams that turn the ball over have scored within 6 seconds. So that's not to say that you won't score if you go slower, but it just means that your scoring percentages go up. But certainly, if you're able to hold on to the ball and you're able to work a score from a slower play, yeah, it's perfectly logical as well.
At what age would you look at introducing this type of play with your teams?
I think the principles of attack and defense should be introduced. I mean, if you play a 1v1, you're automatically going to be getting players to think about, well, if I don't have the ball, what am I supposed to do? If you don't have the ball, you have to get the ball back off him. So that that's a simple principle in any game where you're encouraging players to be patient, to try and flick the ball away or to push the forward away from the scoring area using your body or shielding them out. So they're learning that principle of defending. Likewise, the forward is learning to be creative, because if you don't have a trick up your sleeve, whether it be a dummy solo or being able to have a dummy kick or turn a pace or use your shoulders to shimmy, you're not going to get away from the defender. So those principles of attack and defense be developed at a young age. But in terms of systems of play, I think you're talking about you're talking about 16 and minor upwards, because I don't think players mentally can tune in to trotting back, getting into the defensive area and forgetting about the ball. I think as long as we should leave the game as long in open, free playing if we can, but not to mirror or replicate what we see at inter-county level.
Thanks, Gerard. A question from Mickey Quigg. How often would you use the pause or freeze frame technique during, for example, a 10-minute game?
I suppose it really depends. You don't want to be doing it too much, because it can piss the players off. If they're not getting continuity in the play. But really, it's about teachable moments or coachable moments. If you have a real brilliant piece of play or something that maybe doesn't look so good, and you want to make a really valuable insight for the players, well, I would freeze frame, and that might be, you might get 3 brilliant moments in a game, in a 10-minute game. You might only get 1. So it really depends on what it is you're doing. So if you're trying to highlight maybe support and defense, how you've got maybe a nose defender, and then you've got a cover defender, and you're somebody in behind, and that they're really doing that to a high level, you might just freeze it and say, okay, what was happening there, lads? And you get real sense of the players buying into the fact that you're actually rewarding and you're actually highlighting good practice. And likewise, when they're doing something that isn't good, and maybe there's an attack up the left-hand side or up the right-hand side, and the next attack is up the right-hand side, and all of a sudden you go, okay, hold it, where are we going again, lads? And all of a sudden the lads are thinking, yeah, well, look, we've gone 3, we're very predictable here, we need to change it up. So it really depends when those teachable moments happen. And for me, they're invaluable, because that's where the learning takes place, that you're pointing out to the players, what options did you have? Did we take them? Okay, let's go again. Off we go.
Okay, we'll try and finish up with the last couple of questions. Question from Mick Cuff. What would you consider more important in transition, speed of player or speed of moving the ball?
That's a really good question. In some of the transitions you saw there, speed of the ball, by the ball being kicked up the field, ended up in great scores, a couple of goals being scored. Speed of the player, I think I said before that the team that has really mobile players, their transitions are going to be quicker. So if your team is really mobile, through your hands can be a good option. But if you've got a good full forward who's got great pair of hands and you can kick the ball into him, obviously the ball is going to go faster if you kick it in there through the hands. So it really depends on your team. But for me, I'd like to see a little bit more kicking in the game, and I think moving the ball through your feet, if you're proficient at kicking the ball, is can cut out a lot of pack defenses. Yeah. Okay,
last one then. And the question was about hurling, but I think again the principle applies in both.
Yeah.
When attacking when transitioning from defense to attack in numbers, it can often be risky, because if you turn over the ball, you can be left open in behind. How would you suggest counter-attacking in numbers but protecting your defense as much as possible at the same time?
Okay, that's a brilliant question, because that's the risk you take. So I suppose that's where communication comes in with your team. Maybe that's something that you discuss with your players. So a lot of the time we use a +1. So what that means is if 3 of our backs decide to go up the field and we've got just three backs covering, well, we need a +1. So somebody drops back. So that means you have 4 defenders, and then the rest of the guys are going up the field. So that's just a simple one, but that's one that's sort of communicated with the team. So if everybody heads up and there's only 2 defenders back, there must be another one. So a +1. So that's one, and it can be anyone. It's not just like a sweeper, it's just an extra player. But that comes from practice. It comes from communication. It comes also from looking at your games and saying, well, did that work? How did it work? And you have to reinforce that all the time. You could be with a team for a number of years, and you know, some of these things take so long to bed in because players are used to how they've been playing for years, or you know, they go back to type under pressure. So practicing, you know, how you want to cover when you're counter attacking is something that you'd have to practice every night in training.
Thanks, Ger. I think we'll leave it at that. I want to say on behalf of everybody on the call tonight to say just thanks to Ger for all the great work that he's put into this over the last number of weeks. You can see the quality of the presentation was superb. And also just for everyone to be aware that all the resources and all the materials that Ger has spoken about there, they'll all be available on the GAA Learning website after this session. For those of you that are going to be joining us again, we have our next session next Tuesday. It's a Q&A session, and the coach in question on next Tuesday is Stuart Lancaster, who's the senior coach of Leinster Rugby, former England head coach also. Stuart presented at our Games Development Conference in 2018, and I've put a link on the learning page for the webinars and Q&A sessions that will bring you back to his presentation that you can have a look and submit any questions that you want for Stuart for next Tuesday. So the registration for Stuart's presentation will open shortly after the end of this session here, and will be open throughout the weekend up until about 7 o'clock next Tuesday. So just be aware that if you have registered before, that you do have to register again for each individual session, because the link that you get to access the call is different each time. So thanks again to Ger, and thank you everybody for joining us, and we hope you have a very good weekend.
Okay, thanks everybody, and best of luck. Happy Easter.